So before I start, I just want to say thanks to Shay and the Inspired team for having me here this evening. As she mentioned, I've been coming for 6 months or so now, and I'm always really impressed by the array of speakers that come here and deliver such insightful messages. I've heard from people who've been through alcohol and drug addictions, broken childhoods and abusive relationships, and tonight we heard from someone who'd been hit by a truck. So when it came for me preparing my speech, I thought, how the hell am I going to compete with that? I'm the son of 2 lawyers, I went to private school, and the toughest decision of my early childhood was deciding whether I wanted a Super Nintendo or Sega Mega Drive for Christmas. So what can I possibly share with you tonight? What is my 10 minutes of wisdom? Well, to start with, I can tell you a little bit about myself. I'm the author of Escape the System, which was the reason I hijacked the stage earlier to put them up there. I run a website called Screw the System. I'm also a tennis coach and a hypnotherapist. Now, with everything I do, what I like to do is help people succeed on their own terms. I'm not talking about society's path, which is work your ass off doing something you're not particularly passionate about, trying to get as much money as you can. I'm talking about finding something that makes you feel alive and happy, and then being able to have an impact doing that. So that tells you a little bit about what I do. But I'm going to tell you a bit now about my story and what's led me to this point. But before I do so, I just want to say who this talk is for. Now, I'm speaking today for anyone who's ever felt that they don't belong or that they don't fit in. I'm going to share with you 3 really powerful insights to help you turn that feeling that you don't belong on its head and use it to your advantage. Now, the first time that I felt that I really didn't belong was when I was 11 years old and I went to secondary school. And I felt it almost immediately. It was like the whole game had changed. Being a kid and then becoming a teenager was no longer about having fun, it was about being cool. And I just couldn't seem to understand why we all had to dress the same or wear certain clothes. I didn't understand that why, if we wanted to seem grown up or hard, we had to smoke and then later on drink or do drugs. I really struggled to fit into this environment. And as a result, I ended up spending a lot of time on my own. I didn't really have many friends, I never went to any parties, never celebrated my birthday, and I was that kid who, when I went to sit down next to somebody, they would move away because I was the loner and nobody really wanted to be associated with me. Now, the next time I remember feeling like I didn't belong was when I went to university. Now, the problem here was that I didn't drink. Now, I don't know how many of you have been to university in England, but back when I went, and I'm sure it's the same now, a lot of the social scene revolved around drinking and alcohol. But again, I just didn't understand what was cool about drinking to the point where you're physically sick. I didn't get what was so great about not remembering what happened the night before. And I kept thinking that this succession of big nights out and partying was just detracting from the bigger picture of where our lives were heading. So again, I struggled to fit in. And this time it was a little worse. I went from having a couple of friends to no friends. I spent 3 years pretty much not speaking to many people and spending most of the time in my bedroom on my own. And get this, the highlight of my week, and I'm a bit ashamed to say this now because I despise the place, but the highlight of my week was going to McDonald's by myself on a Saturday evening and then going to the cinema afterwards on my own. Now, the last time I felt that I didn't belong was when I entered the world of work, or the real world, as everybody calls it. Now, I was terrified about the prospect of working 40 plus hours a week for over 40 years of my life, doing something that at best I wasn't passionate about, or at worst bored my brains out. I kept looking at adults and thinking, why the hell do they put up with being somewhere they don't want to be and spending time with people they don't want to spend with? And I thought to myself, I can't become a part of this world. And this time I decided to fight back. Now, you see, between the age of 11 and 22, I'd always dealt with this feeling that I didn't belong by hiding myself away or disengaging from the world. But this time I decided something had to change. I had to try and create my own reality where I was happy and I lived by my own rules. Now, fast forward to today, and I've managed to be successful in doing so. And what I want to share with you now is the three insights that have enabled me to flip this feeling on its head of not belonging and use it to my advantage. So, if you're feeling this way, that you don't fit in or that you don't belong, this is what I want you to know. Number one, the real world does not exist. Our parents, teachers, media, bosses, colleagues use this term to try to crush our dreams and get us to believe in a small and limited reality. The thing is, and there's a science behind this, which I'm going to explain, this idea that there's one universal reality doesn't actually exist. Now, what I'm about to tell you comes from a documentary called The Brain by a guy called David Eagleman. And he explains that when we see something in the world and we take it in through our eyes, it passes from our eyes into our thalamus, which is sort of the gateway or center point in our brain, and then into our visual cortex, which is the storehouse where our memories are kept. And the really interesting thing is there's 6 times more traffic along our neurons from the visual cortex to the thalamus than it is from the eyes to the thalamus. So basically what that means is we don't see the world as it is. What we have is a reality created inside our head already that gives a meaning to the things we're seeing. Now this means that this real world that everybody talks about and tells you you've got to conform to does not exist, and you are under no obligation to conform and live by its rules. Now the second insight I want to tell you is that this feeling of not being normal is actually a blessing. So when you don't feel that you're normal, this feeling of not being normal is actually a blessing. So what I'm going to say is don't ever want or ask to be normal. Embrace your individuality. You're so much greater than being normal. I don't know how many of you have seen a film called The Imitation Game with Benedict Cumberbatch. Yeah, it's a film about a guy called Alan Turing, who was a Second World War code breaker who helped break the Nazis' Enigma code and brought an end to, well, helped bring a quicker end to the Second World War and save millions of people's lives. Now, he always felt like he didn't belong. He was gay in a time when it was a crime to be so. He didn't follow any social etiquettes of the day, and he was a bit of a loner as well. Now, what happened after the war is the system treated him shamefully. They didn't acknowledge any of his work because of the official War Secrets Act, and he was medically castrated because he was homosexual. Now, in the film, you see him broken down and depressed and very sad about this, and his friend comes along and says something to him which is so powerful for anyone who feels that they're not normal. And I've actually got it written down, so I'm going to read it very quickly to you. Now, in the film, she says this to him: "No one normal could have done that," and she's referring to his work on breaking the code. "Do you know, this morning I was on a train that went through a city that wouldn't exist if it wasn't for you. I bought a ticket from a man who would likely be dead if it wasn't for you. I read up on my work, a whole field of scientific inquiry that exists only because of you. Now, if you wished you could have been normal, I can promise you that I do not. The world is an infinitely better place precisely because you weren't." And that leads very nicely onto my final insight. If you feel that you don't belong, it actually means that you're an agent of change in this world. There's a great quote by George Bernard Shaw that goes like this: "The reasonable man adapts himself to the world. The unreasonable man adapts the world to himself. That's why all progress depends on the unreasonable man." So this just means if you feel like you don't belong, there's something out there that you need to change in the world. It could be that you need to change people's attitudes. It could be, like Turing, you need to come up with an invention, something you need to create. Or it could be that just by walking your own unique path, you're going to inspire and uplift other people. So that's my final message for tonight. Don't fight this feeling that you don't belong. Instead, listen to it, and listen to the message it contains, and then act on it. And people are going to tell you to live in the real world and it's not possible, but you don't have to listen to it. And it's ironic, the thing that you may feel is your life's curse may turn out to be the blessing that opens the door to your wildest dreams. Thank you.